You are here today to talk with us a bit about what we're seeing in terms of the world of work. And as
Yeah,
someone
yeah,
who does this as your real job, your full gig,
yeah,
I
yeah.
could think of no one better to help us understand what's happening right now. Black Americans are not experiencing a February 2025 that many of them thought they might have. Give us the tea on what's happening right now and what we can do to prepare to take advantage of this moment and not be overrun by it.
And not be overrun and overwhelmed by it, right? Like, listen, the truth is that that millions of Black Americans, um, millions of Black Americans just walked into 2025, and it is not at all what we had anticipated. We've had 4 years of the lowest Black unemployment in history, and our largest wealth gains in a generation. We saw 60% increase in wealth generation from 2019 to 2022 alone. Black
Wow.
job seekers are now coming into a space in this year where we're like, wait, what? I mean, it's frustrating, but we're hearing that like Black folks are still going to be looking for working opportunities, but they're really honest, or they've been honest with us about the fact that they feel like that the current economic and political environment may hinder their options and their choices. And if you look across the bow, even at what's happening in government and federal government across the board, I mean, I live in Atlanta, and Georgia is a city that has a ton of federal workers because the CDC is here, right? And
Wow.
so you got to think about um, how I'm a Gen Xer, right? And I think about how my parents' generation, it was you were guaranteed a pretty good life if you got a good government job, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you were more
Mm-hmm.
closely aligned to being able to potentially have a pension. Government workers are oftentimes some of the largest concentration of homeowners in our communities. And so when you think about home ownership's relationship to wealth creation and wealth generation, then you got to now say, okay, here's where we are. What do we need to know right now? And there's a um there's a guy who is he's an analyst and he's a poet, and he talks about Black folks needing to practice thick community. You and I talked a little bit about this, right? And that meaning that like between the chaos is community, and we're going to have to practice thick community in this moment.
That.
And what that looks like to me, Lurie, is how we start to pivot. So we're going to have to pivot fast. Like, we don't have the
Yeah,
luxury to panic.
that's right.
We need to
That's
be able
right.
to hear what's going on and say, okay, this is what's happening. This shit is real for us. When America gets a cold, Black folks get the flu. We know
Mhm.
this. And so we have to now manage what that pivot looks like. And part of that, I feel like, is that we've got to start to think about our careers and not necessarily um, career safety and all those things, but career resilience, that we build careers that we can actually be able to pivot from one thing to another. I'm doing a special series on LinkedIn in my LinkedIn newsletter called The Power to Pivot. So I talked to Brittany Oliver. It was a woman who had a career in PR, and she was like, look, the PR firms, the agencies, they were not appreciating my talent. I'd moved
Mm.
around. I was being stalled in the middle of my career, and I pivoted to journalism. I knew my skills as a writer. I knew my skills as a truth teller. I knew my level of integrity in dealing with messaging, right? And she said, and I said, where are those skills appreciated more? And she pivoted to journalism. And I think that one of the things that Brittany says in this newsletter, and I'll link out to it on Twitter, is she was talking about not just the tactical part of it, but getting your mind right and the
Mm.
emotional pivot, right? Because she said, I had built this whole career in PR. She said it felt like a breakup. She said I had to really get my mindset. And I think that there's a lot of people who are going to experience getting a pink slip from their big agency where they've spent years doing that work, or they're literally seeing their life's work dismantled in diversity and inclusion roles and things like that. And you're going to have to deal with that emotional piece of it, deal with that breakup, deal with that heartache, or on all those things, and then say, okay, but here's what my plan looks like.
Mm.
And you
And
don't do that
it's so
alone.
interesting. Yeah, you can't do it alone because this is really where community is going to have to thicken up, to use the phrase that you mentioned at the beginning. It's interesting that you mentioned housing and the connection between federal jobs and housing, because we have seen reports that as a result of all of these layoffs and pending layoffs and potential layoffs, the housing market in DC, the housing market in cities that have large federal workforces, completely collapsing because there are so many houses going on the market in such a short period of time during the winter, right? This is
During the
not
winter.
typically when you tend to see houses going on the market, but we're seeing the ripple effects. And Drew, the reality is that all of these, potentially thousands of federal workers no longer being employed, that is going to have a massive impact on unemployment insurance, on unemployment levels. And when you started out saying that Black people under 4 years of President Barack Obama, never mind. I was going to be snarky, but let me not do that. Under President Joe Biden, let's keep it
Yeah.
focused. Under President Joe Biden, 4 years of job growth. And now are we seeing a contraction in job opportunities for Black workers? Where do the numbers tend to lead in terms of what we should pivot to? How do we know what a pivot looks like?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people who might have said, going from PR to journalism in a time where journalism is being shut down might not have been a pivot that they want to make. How do we know what to pivot to and what a pivot actually looks like, depending on where we focus for our career up until this point?
Sure. And here's the thing that I think that Brittany talks about in the newsletter too, is that that I think is part of like being ready to do that pivot is go where you're wanted, right?
Yes.
So you got to have a balance
Yes.
of go where the opportunities are. But for us, we have to also say go where we're wanted. And so she put the net out and cast a wide net, but she pivoted from, she used her relationships that she had with media and with journalists by doing PR. So she used her community, her network, right? And then she said, let me go where I'm wanted. Where is my opinion or where is my skill set and my cultural competency, my knowledge about Blackness or about being a woman? Where would that be appreciated? Her first two magazines that she wrote for were Essence and another women's magazine, right? So she cast a wide net. She said, where are my differences, my assets? And so I think that that's where we start to think about the power of the pivot in that. So I can tell you that hospitality is hiring. I can tell you that healthcare is hiring. I can tell you that these industries that are actually hiring, right? But then you start to think, let me also be really, really clear about the fact that I might need to now look to see where are the companies and the organizations that have been publicly committed to hiring diversely, to hiring equitably, to hiring inclusively. And so then you start to look at these companies that have made these commitments, right? Or these companies that have said, we're not backing down. We're going to see that again, a ton of that in hospitality. You had the 5 CEOs of the biggest hotel companies saying diversity is what makes us great. So you're saying that they all of the CEOs of the top 5 hoteliers said, we're still committed to this, right? We're going to still be hiring for this. We're going to still be focusing on belonging. So now you start to say, go where you want it. What does that look like? These are the questions that we start to ask ourselves. The other thing for the pivot, Lurie, is I think here's what the data told us. We saw in our data that 1 in 5 Black professionals are absolutely worried that switching jobs will cost them their stability. That's a lot to say. That they're saying, because most of the time we think
that feels right to me, like, because to move right now feels like, well, if I'm moving into a place that might 2 weeks from now have a change in their diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility programming, what does that mean for me being last hired? Am I going to be the first fired? That feels like a worry that I would certainly have in this moment. Well, what do you say to that?
So it's also wild, Lurie, because we typically think about changing jobs. It's like, oh, I got more money and I got more opportunity and it was a better fit, or this was the next progression in my career. So if 1 in 5 Black professionals are worried about switching jobs will cost them their stability, I think that the other piece of it is that, one, the opportunities are compressed right now, so you got to be really clear. So the thing I think about that stability piece of it is you got to know what your current financial situation is and be really clear about it, right? Like it might be a time to do some assessments, like say, okay, what can my finances bear? And I think that information is power. Even if the information ain't as good as you would like it to be, knowing is half the battle so that then you can plan for it. The other thing that I think that for Black professionals is that in addition to having to get to that level of career resilience, you got to think about your skills. You got to think about all these things that you have, and you got to think about your network. The other piece that we talked about already, right, was like, okay, well, you go where you want it. Do that research. Talk to your network. Is this a safe place, a safe space for Black folks? Is this a place where I can, if they find out I'm gay, it's not going to be a problem. I'm not going to be on a target. Right. Like I need, and so talk to other Black folks who got their head on a swivel. That is thick community. I think this is now the time where you got to talk to your Black friends who have decided to stay woke in these companies, right? And who will be honest with you and talk to you about it. The thing that I think is that is some good news in this is that we also saw that 25% of the Black folks who pivoted into new careers over the past year felt like it was incredibly successful for them. Now, there are other folks who felt like it was successful, but 25% said it was a good move when they pivoted industries, right? And so that's, I think, some good news that we can hear where people are saying, okay, I leveraged my skills and I was in this industry, I was in education, but I pivoted to hospitality or I pivoted to healthcare, and it was a good move for me. The next person that I'm talking to in the newsletter is a guy who was a career government servant, right? Worked on the Hill for 20 plus years. The newsletter comes out in a week. He pivoted to talking about policy at a large company, Starbucks, right? And he was like, here's how I use my skills as a career government professional. And I used those skills to go over to this company that had clear inclusion policies, right? That they had made a commitment. And I used my network. I talked to the folks. I found this job. I investigated them the way they investigate me. And the pivot has been great for me, right? And so what I'm trying to do with this newsletter is give people a blueprint of other people who have done it so that if you can see it, you can actually be it then too. Black people are making these pivots, but it ain't easy.